Right now, inside your stomach, there's hydrochloric acid and an enzyme that breaks the protein in meat into pieces. And here's the odd part. The stomach itself is also made of protein and living cells. Without constant protection, acid and pepsin really could damage its wall. So what every single second separates this aggressive environment from living tissue? Why, when that protection weakens, does an ulcer appear? Even when there isn't too much acid? And who decides why fatty food usually leaves the stomach more slowly than food that's more liquid and less calorie dense? Let's start with this. The stomach is not a motionless bag filled with acid at all. People often picture the stomach as a motionless bag, as if food just sits in the acid while it dissolves. But the stomach is moving all the time. Waves of muscle contractions travel along its walls and push the contents down toward the exit into the small intestine, the pylorus. And this exit doesn't work like an open door. During digestion, it stays very narrow. Liquid and small enough particles pass through, while larger fragments are held back. When a wave pushes the contents toward the nearly closed pylorus, a big part of it is squirted back into the stomach. This is called retropulsion. Strong contractions and jets of fluid mix and grind the particles again. Then the contents head for the exit once more and get pushed back again, if the pieces are still too big. So you get a kind of mill with a narrow gate. Usually solid particles have to shrink to about 1 or 2 millimeters before they can pass through. It's not an absolute rule. A lot depends on the structure of the food. But that's the basic principle. Little by little, the stomach turns food into a thick semi-liquid mass, chyme, and sends it into the intestine in small portions. And this is where it becomes clear why you really should chew carefully. The stomach can finish grinding what wasn't chewed enough, but it can't fully replace your teeth for every kind of food. Nuts and seeds have it especially hard. They're nutrients hidden inside dense cell walls. If the walls are intact, it's harder for enzymes to reach what's inside. But this moving acidic mix is constantly rubbing against the living surface of the organ. So why doesn't the stomach digest itself? First, let's figure out what actually breaks the food down. The cells of the stomach release hydrochloric acid. It creates a very acidic environment, changes the spatial structure of proteins, and activates an enzyme. But the acid doesn't do all the work by itself. The molecular scissors here are pepsin. It cuts long protein chains into short fragments. So the acid sets up the conditions, and the enzymes do the cutting. And here's the first problem. If pepsin cuts proteins, why doesn't it damage the very cell that made it? Because the cell releases an inactive precursor, pepsinogen. It turns into active pepsin only after it reaches the acidic cavity of the stomach. That's the first safeguard. The enzyme is produced in a safe, inactive form and switches on only where it's meant to work. But now acid and active pepsin sit right next to the entire inner surface of the stomach. What protects it? The first line is mucus. It coats the cells and slows the acid moving toward them. But mucus isn't an airtight film, and small hydrogen ions can pass through it. So inside the mucus layer, bicarbonate is held in place, able to neutralize the acid. Thanks to it, right at the cell surface, the environment becomes far less acidic than in the center, and normally it can get close to neutral. Across a thickness smaller than the mucus layer, 2 different chemical worlds exist: an acidic reactor in the center and a protected surface near the cells. And this barrier can't be built once and forgotten. Mucus is worn away along with the contents. So the cells constantly release new portions of mucus and bicarbonate. And what if some ions do break through? Under the mucus, they meet a dense layer of cells, joined so that the contents can't slip between them deeper into the tissue. And if a cell is damaged after all, neighboring ones quickly shift over and close the gap. And then dividing cells replace the damaged ones. Repairs like that need oxygen and nutrients, and the blood flow brings them. This defense is managed in part by prostaglandins. They support both the blood supply to the lining and the production of mucus with bicarbonate. So you get several levels of defense at once. Pepsin in its inactive form, mucus. Bicarbonate at the surface, tight junctions between the cells. Blood flow and constant repair. If one level lets a threat through, the next one meets it. But this system isn't absolute. If the balance between the aggressive environment and the protection breaks down, acid and pepsin really can damage the lining. For example, the bacterium H. pylori can cause chronic inflammation and weaken the protection. Another example, common painkillers, the NSAIDs. They suppress prostaglandins, and because of that, the lining may produce less protective mucus and bicarbonate, while its blood supply and recovery get worse. This doesn't mean every pill will cause an ulcer, but the principle matters. It's not only about the amount of acid. Sometimes the damage begins because the protection has weakened. So an ulcer isn't just a spot burned through by acid. It's the result of a broken balance between aggressive contents and the system that's supposed to keep them apart from living tissue. And that answers the main question. Food doesn't release mucus and bicarbonate, doesn't maintain blood flow, and doesn't repair its own surface. The stomach wall does all of that. The stomach protects itself not because the acid is harmless to it, but because every second it separates the aggressive contents from living tissue and constantly repairs minor damage. Now the stomach sends chyme into the intestine in portions. But after a fatty meal, the exit slows down noticeably. It feels as if the fat is heavy and gets stuck. In reality, fat doesn't stick to the stomach. Its muscles are perfectly able to move this food. The real break is farther along, in the small intestine. When the first portion of fatty chyme passes the pylorus, specialized cells of the lining recognize the products of fat digestion. The intestine doesn't know the name of the dish. It detects specific substances and uses them to gauge what kind of load has arrived. In response, hormonal and nervous feedback signals kick in. One of the main players is the hormone cholecystokinin, CCK. It helps slow gastric emptying, triggers the gallbladder to contract, and stimulates the release of pancreatic enzymes. But CCK doesn't act alone. Nerve reflexes and other intestinal signals work alongside it. Control is shared among cells, nerves, and hormones. The point of it all is the same. The stomach has to briefly reduce the delivery, while the intestine neutralizes the acid, mixes chyme with bile and enzymes, and processes what's arrived. At the same time, the intestine begins preparing the fat for digestion. The intestine's movements disperse it into tiny droplets, and bile salts coat them, stabilize them, and keep them from quickly merging back together. So the enzyme lipase gets more surface to work on. To coordinate all of this, a controlled flow is exactly what's needed. So the holdup of fatty food isn't a sign that the body can't cope. It's a way of not sending the next portion faster than the intestine is ready to take it. And that's exactly why fullness lasts longer after fatty food. The stomach stays stretched for longer, and the intestine keeps signaling the nervous system about the substances that arrived. But the emptying time can't be judged by the amount of fat alone. It's affected by the meal's volume and calories, the particle size, the ratio of proteins to carbs, fiber, acidity, and individual motility. More precisely, all else being equal, fat and a high-calorie content usually slow gastric emptying. The stomach pushes food forward, but the intestine sets the speed. What to take away? An ulcer is about the balance of protection, not just about too much acid. Acid painkillers aren't harmless to the lining, and they're worth discussing with a doctor. And that lasting fullness after fatty food isn't a stone in the stomach. It's a deliberate intestinal break. Chyme moves on in portions. To process it, the pancreas releases enzymes, including proteases capable of cutting protein both in food and in your own cells. So why don't they start digesting the gland itself? That's for the next episode. Subscribe to BioCode Lab, where the complex becomes simple.